if you've studied history for more than about 15 minutes, you know that letting a private individual pay their own army is pretty dangerous. So why is the DoD allowing a private citizen to just bankroll the US military? But even worse, is he associated with some of the most notorious and disgusting human beings in the 21st century? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. But of course, you guys know that October is coming to a close and there's only a few days left on Strike Gum's fall sale. That's right. It's buy two. If anything, get the third free. Add 3 items to your cart and you'll see the discount automatically applied. Strike Gum, of course, 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece, 100 milligrams alpha GPC, 0 sugar. There's a reason it is the preferred energy alternative to gross energy drinks. It's used from everyone from North Sea oil workers to Ukrainian drone pilots to a dad and very tired triathlete. In fact, one of the Ukrainian units that I recently talked to actually told me that they put packs of Strike Gum in their resupply drops because this is the most efficient way to get caffeine to those soldiers in positions on the front. So if it's good enough for the people where staying focused is life and death, you know it'll get the job done for you. So check it out, strikegum.com, links in the description. Now, here's what I really want to talk about. This guy, well, not this guy, that's Donald Trump, but billionaire Tim Mellon. Now, Tim Mellon is the mystery donor who donated $130 million to help pay the military during the shutdown. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, you might note that $130 million will only pay about $100 per soldier. But don't get me wrong. It's good that soldiers get paid. They wake up every day, defend the country, swore an oath to the Constitution, and you want to see them get paid, right? But the strangest part and most disturbing part is that who is doing the paying? That's the problem. Now, there's some core problems with the idea of Mellon, who is, by the way, a Trump mega donor, second only to Elon Musk in terms of donations to the Trump campaign and various Trump super PACs. But the troubling part, really, is that Mellon is, well, you know, not a, Trump says he's a great American citizen and a substantial man who would prefer that his name not be mentioned. But the fact is that he prefers his name not be mentioned because of his uncomfortable associations with some of one of the worst criminals. It's exactly who you think it is. But now I want to point out that also it is not legal for him to do this. Budget experts have said that this allegedly violates the Anti-Deficiency Act, which puts barriers on the use of funds and personnel during an appropriation lapse, prohibiting use of funds not allocated by Congress. And this is realizing a principle in the Constitution that spending is controlled by Congress. Now, if the president, for example, through donations or through fundraising or through sort of informal money-grabbing techniques, acquires money within the executive branch without congressional approval and then distributes it to programs as he sees fit, that is bypassing a constitutionally required role of Congress. That's why the Anti-Deficiency Act exists. It codifies the principle that spending for government operations comes from Congress, and if Congress doesn't approve it, it doesn't happen. Right? That doesn't mean that the executive branch doesn't raise money. Look at the post office, for example, right? You pay a couple bucks for a stamp, you pay $15 to ship, the Christmas present to your grandma. But the Congress has said it is okay for the Postal Service to sell stamps and to charge for packages, right? It is okay as long as the Postal Service uses that revenue to fund specifically postal operations, right? And so that is how the Anti-Deficiency Act enshrines a principle of the Constitution. And so the fact that someone like Tim Mellon is simply has donated to the president, likely in order to curry favor with the president, because that's generally why billionaires donate. And then, right, at the very least, he's donating because the president does things that he likes and that align with his political views. So there is some level of intrinsic tit for tat. Now, what if Tim Mellon says, hey, I think that the U.S. military, you guys should really crack down on these drug traffickers. Well, and he says, well, I'm technically paying the U.S. military, so you should really do it. That is so dangerous, guys. A private citizen having the leverage to dictate U.S. military operations is fucking insane, right? And that is meant to be mitigated by this Anti-Deficiency Act, right? But what's more disturbing is who Tim Mellon is. And that's where things get kind of twisted. Because Tim Mellon has a bunch of uncomfortable links to none other than Jeffrey Epstein. Now, he also is just not that smart a guy, right? For example, he became obsessed with finding the plane for Amelia Earhart. He's 83 years old, married and divorced 3 times. But what's strange is, and of course, a huge Trump donor. But the strange, uncomfortable part is that, one, the source of Mellon's billions is actually Bank of New York Mellon. Now, that's a publicly traded company, and it's not clear that he has an operational role within it. But it is weird that Bank of New York Mellon, was actually accused of allegedly helping finance Jeffrey Epstein's operations and was sued by a Jane Doe victim of Epstein's for providing financing, transactions, moving the money around. Remember, doing all those things that the DOJ officially says never happened, that no one moved money around in Jeffrey Epstein's operations. Jeffrey Epstein never paid anyone. He was a solo dude, so obviously the very notion that he used a bank is preposterous, of course. But even more disturbing is that Tim Mellon does not appear in the Jeffrey Epstein flight logs. His dad does, though. It's actually pretty weird, right? Paul Mellon, that is Tim's dad, flew several times on the Epstein flight before his death, right? In fact, he was 91 when he died. He flew with Epstein between Mellon's Virginia horse farm in Richmond on April 6th, 1998, as well as, let's see, who else was on here? Here we go. Paul Mellon and 2 females. Paul Mellon, 2 females. Jeffrey Epstein, Paul Mellon, 2 females. Jeffrey Epstein, Paul Mellon, 2 females. Jeffrey Epstein, 2 females. Interesting. So the dad, at 91 years old, flies Jeffrey Epstein and 2 females. Right, in 98, Paul Mellon dies in 99. Now, his son is clearly become a deep, it's kind of weird. Okay, let's just acknowledge that I'm not making any kind of formal allegation. I'm just saying these are some weird links that the bank owned and operated and sold off by Paul Mellon facilitated many Epstein transactions to a point where they got themselves sued. Then Paul Mellon rides on the plane with Jeffrey Epstein and 2 unnamed females, which is kind of weird. Even in the flight logs, he gets named, Epstein gets named, the 2 females are just females. Weird, right? And then, he dies in 99. His son takes over, the trust, the Historic Foundation, right? And does a bunch of other kind of weird investments. In fact, Tim Mellon ends up somehow founding a software company in the 60s right after graduating Yale that he sold to IBM. Then he founded a wood treating business that he sold to Amtrak and Contrail. Then he founded a transportation industries, a railroad holding company, buying a bunch of railroads as one does, right, all the way through 1998. A weird. He also bought Pan Am Airways, right, which, get this, one of his companies, the Pan Am Systems operated subsidiary of Boston Maine Airways, was owned by Tim Mellon until it was shuttered in 2008 after the Department of Transportation said they falsified financial records and was unable to financially sustain operations, right? It's all very weird, right? A weird dude and a staunch Republican. But again, I'm not saying that this guy, they have some great evidence that he did anything. But man, it is weird that he has a strange sort of source of wealth. He's able to start and then sell these businesses again and again and again, despite really just having a computer science degree from Yale that he himself says is worthless. His father was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. That his grandfather, by the way, I want to point out that his grandfather was Andrew Mellon, the super mega magnate, right? This is A.W. Mellon, banker, businessman, industrialist, philanthropist, art collector, and politician, son of the Mellon family patriarch Thomas Mellon, vast business empire, and secretary of Treasury for the United States, presiding over the boom years of the 20s and the Wall Street crash in 1929. So I want to point out that, again, a little bit like Ghislaine Maxwell, this Paul Mellon was tied into this world, or Tim Mellon was, and by extension, Paul Mellon was tied into this generational world of power and media and wealth and control. It's all so weird and so sus. And now, don't worry, guys, there's nothing problematic about the fact that he is paying the bills for the U.S. military, right? Historically, of course, you guys know I'm joking around, but if you look at history, you realize that the person who signs the checks for a military almost always has their loyalty. It's one of the reasons why Caesar's legions marched on Rome. They were loyal to Caesar, the provider of the checks, not Rome, the flag they marched under. And you can look through history, right? Look at Franco and the Moroccan Spanish army that he used to overthrow the Republican government in 1930s Spain, right? That's somebody else who, again, had this individual control that didn't view, was really seen as the actual provider of resources for that army, not the Spanish government in Madrid. These are really problematic relationships to have. And again, it's not legal in the United States to do so. But somehow laws only apply, I guess, if you're a loser. Anyway, thanks, guys. GMAT Club, Henry Roussier, James Porsche, Paul, the Peter Fucci, all of our Lieutenant tier members. Hit subscribe, and of course, check us out, strikegum.com. See ya. Cheers.